We'll stay in West Africa as Alassane Ouattara has been sworn in for a fourth term as president of Ivory Coast. He's been in power since 2011 and won re-election in a vote that excluded his two main rivals. This has prompted criticism from opposition figures about concerns around democratic norms. But supporters highlight his record on economic growth and infrastructure, while critics point to what they say is rising inequality.
Devant le peuple souverain de Côte d'Ivoire, je jure solennellement et sur l'honneur de respecter et de défendre fidèlement la Constitution.
On the day after the government in Benin announced that an attempted coup had failed, in a televised address, President Patrice Talon told the nation that loyal members of the security forces had defeated a small group which had attempted to seize control of the country on Sunday. Gunshots were heard in the capital, Cotonou, and some journalists who work for the state broadcaster were held hostage. Later on Sunday, the Nigerian authorities announced that their counterparts in Benin had asked for assistance, and Nigeria, which is its neighbor to the east, said it had sent fighter jets to help stop the mutiny, and that this country's troops had joined a multinational ECOWAS force to help stabilize Benin.
Un groupuscule de soldats, sous prétexte.
Beninese men and women, my dear compatriots, I am addressing you tonight because our country experienced events of extreme gravity today. Indeed, a group of soldiers, under the pretext of false claims, undertook a mutiny aimed at attacking the institutions of the Republic and destabilizing our nation, thereby challenging the democratic order. Such an action would have had the consequence of plunging our country into a reckless adventure with disastrous outcomes. It would have brought to a halt the development process initiated by our country thanks to the efforts undertaken by all its sons and daughters. In such circumstances, as a Republican duty, it falls upon me, in my capacity as President of the Republic, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, and guarantor of the country's stability, to take the appropriate measures to thwart the actions of adventurers seeking to drag us back into a regrettable past. Therefore, in coordination with the Command of the Defense and Security Forces, I have undertaken the necessary actions to maintain peace and ensure the safety and tranquility of everyone across the national territory. I would like here to salute the sense of duty of our army and its leaders, who remained Republican and loyal to the homeland. With them, we confronted the situation, retook positions, and cleared the last pockets of resistance of the mutineers. This commitment and mobilization allowed us to thwart these adventurers and prevent the worst for our country. This act will not go unpunished. I take this opportunity to congratulate our defense and security forces as a whole for their sense of duty. I would also like to express my thoughts for the victims of this senseless adventure, as well as for those still held by the fleeing mutineers. I assure them that we will do everything possible to bring them back safely.
Et d'éviter le pire à notre pays.
President Patrice Talon. All right, Dr. Bati Rufai, a number of stories. Okay, well, a few stories today, this morning, were very rich in content and in detail. The first fact, and we spoke to Charles Erika earlier on around the release of the 100 Niger children. From the calculations, there's still 165 students and teachers still in captivity. And then the swearing in of Alassane Ouattara at 83 in Ivory Coast. And then finally, we come to, still on the West African region, with Benin Republic, the coup, foiled coup, and the fact that he's thanking people. Well, I did hear you say Nigeria, but go ahead.
Ayo, let's time travel. If we're at this point in time in the 80s when the Metisani riot happened, and you read about the prowess of a military general called Muhammadu Buhari that chased these Metisani people into Chad, that was the height of the Nigerian army. But juxtapose that with today, and if they tell you that the national security advisor of a country will be that one giving assurances to families of those that have been kidnapped, that their children will come back home while they have negotiations and romance with this criminal. The first question that you will ask yourself is, what happened to the Nigerian states? The second question you'll ask yourself is, are these the vestiges of a failing state? So my question today is to the security architecture, what happened to Nigeria? Are these the vestige of a failing state? That we now go to beg to get our people rather than show military might. If you go back to the Nigerian Constitution, Section 40 of Section 2, about the sole responsibility of government being to provide security for lives and property, there is something we as Nigerians do in exchange for government to do that. We surrender our sovereignty to the government in a bid for the government to protect us. So it's a social contract. If you read Jean-Jacques Rousseau, what do you do for me that will make me do something in return for you? We have surrendered our sovereignty, and we in turn expect the government to protect us. And that's why when we collect salaries and they remove payee taxes from our salaries, we are paying all of these taxes because we expect them to be able to do something in return. But when they now fail in that responsibility, then there's a failure in the social contract. And when there's a failure in the social contracts, people can actually call for the resignation of the president of the country. Because there's a failure in the social contracts. So, whatever it's worth, despite the fact that we can celebrate on behalf of those that have come back home, let's not forget that there's been a failure in the social contract President Tinubu promised us. So it's not amiss when people call for his resignation. And let's stop being sentimental. It's not the end of the world. If we call for President Tinubu's resignation, heaven will not fall. It's for him to double up. Let me quickly quash another lie we tell. And I've been hearing that lie a lot in the security circle. The reason why we don't want to go in there and fight these bandits and recover these people is to avoid collateral damage. It's a lie. I'll remind you, 2020, an American, Walton, was arrested by a bandit group or terrorists, a bunch of terrorists. 6 of them, they took him. The Americans contacted the same Nigerian government. They got intel about where he was. They brought in Naval SEAL into this country, conducted an operation, killed 6 of the terrorists, evacuated the man, took him to the American embassy in Niamey, in Niger, from there en route to America. President Trump went on the air and bragged about it. Our own, we never see the bandits being killed in the rescue. You heard what Professor Bolaji Akinyemi said that day. When we did everything and were ready for the Americans to be able to fight Boko Haram, all of a sudden, as regards the Chibok girls, we saw that the gas mask, terrorists were already wearing them. The gas mask they were supposed to get. So who is doing the infiltration? And this pattern is repetitive. The question is, when next will it happen? And when it happens next, it's still going to be the same modus operandi. The government will never hear that in a rescue operation, they get these people killed. Every effort to get these people killed, they stop it. President Buhari, the first thing he did when he came into power was he stopped that agreement that the Jonathan government had with mercenaries. So you see, while we deceive ourselves with the false illusion that yes, they are back home, what were the terms and conditions? What did we lose? We lost the fear of the state because the state is supposed to have the autonomy of violence. If there's any non-state actors that has more violence than the state, then go back to Section 14, Section 2. The protection and the security is hampered. Then what happens? The state has broken its social contract with the people. And I have a premise to call for the resignation of the president. So I think I've made that point clear. So while we celebrate, yes, but there's also shame. Egmi is coming on us gradually. The second point. Yesterday we have commended the Nigerian military for the work well done. Yeah, we have to save. But Dr. Bati, I don't know if you have the facts. Maybe the president has not transmitted that letter he needs to transmit to the Senate as regards his activity in Benin Republic.
No. Under Section 5, Sub 5, he has 7 days.
7 days, okay.
7 days within which you can transmit the letter.
Okay.
And then the National Assembly is expected to offer its ratification within 14 days.
Okay.
But I've had some bathroom illiterates
Okay.
who do not even understand adjectival law, who cannot interpret the Constitution, saying, oh, the president can do as he wishes. No. The whole idea of that section of the law is to say that the president of Nigeria cannot act arbitrarily.
And unilaterally.
If he goes on limited combat duty, he comes back
and he
to the same National Assembly to offer an explanation and seek ratification.
Very good on that.
But that has not been done yet, to the best of my knowledge.
Coming back to Talon, isn't it a shame? And maybe we'll have to write a note verbal again. Isn't it a shame that in the recognition of the efforts played, Talon is not recognizing us? So the question is, yes, we did it in our own interests. And on that decision, I support President Tinubu because we needed to steady the ship. President Tinubu, you have my endorsement on that decision, but the point I will make is come back and do the right thing. I support you 100% on that decision. But it is a shame that Talon is not even respecting us. And I think the most important factor is that let's stop acting as though Talon is a saint. I think we've established that yesterday. Yeah. Because if you want to feel the pulse of the people were already saying yesterday, about Talon. Down with Talon. This is a man that has used his high-handedness to disrupt the order of things in this country. So, and last one I was using the word Yahoo African leaders. Anyway, he's leaving next year. His successor will come in. We'll see what the future of Benin Republic will be. As regards Ouattara, I'm sorry, what are we celebrating? It's another day for mourning for Africa. This same Ouattara that we thought was going to be different from the people he fought against, this same Ouattara stopped Tijantiam because of the laws of the land as regards nationality, French nationality. But this was the same Ouattara that a lot of people fought and spoke up for when they used that same law against him because his father had links to Burkina Faso. And they were claiming something called Ivoirité. That you have to be a pure line Ivorian on parentage for you to be able to lead Ivory Coast until those laws were reversed. But when it was convenient for Ouattara, he used it. This is the same Ouattara that has stayed on in power because all his possible successors that he could manipulate, one way or the other, they passed. The likes of Hamid Bakayoko, the likes of Gwe, and a couple of other people. This was the same Ouattara that because of it, there was a civil war that happened. We called Laurent Gbagbo the enemy then. But now he has gotten to power. What has he done? So, him saying America endorses him. Yes, America will endorse you because they need your stability to be able to perpetrate their influence.
They need your instability.
No, they need your stability. We will bring about some level of stability because at least they know, okay, Ouattara is there for some time. But the question African leaders fail to answer is then what happens to your country after you leave? It goes back to the mentality of the medieval French king that was fond of saying, après moi, le déluge. That after I leave, everything can sink. Because that's the gulf people open up. This same Ouattara that is celebrating, elections over 2,000 people were detained, 11 people were killed. Because he wanted to get over 80% of the votes. Then you put in very watery candidates, like the likes of the wife of Gbagbo, to be able to make yourself look good. So it has just shown with these episodes, both Ivory Coast and Benin Republic, that Africa keeps hovering. And see, when you check the historical antecedent of Africa, this is how Africa has hovered. That's why since 1957, when a couple of African countries started getting independence, to about 1990, Africa as a continent had well over 100 coups. So if you are to juxtapose that with the population, with the number of countries, before 1990, at least each country had 2 coups, if you were to share coups round. And it's because of this level of sectarism. So we thought in the 70s, the era of Bukasa, the era of Idi Amin Dada was over. The era of Matthew Kirikou was over. We thought the era of Arab Moi was over. But guess what? We have gotten into a new era of dictatorship. We thought Eyadema Nasingbe was over. Now Furo Eyadema has put himself there and it's extended power. And this might be the challenge of Africa for the next 20 years. And that's why, despite the fact that Africa is the next frontier in terms of development and everything, the future still looks bleak as long as you have these Yahoo tenants in the seat of power. Africa will not grow when you have people like Ouattara, Talon, and other people that destroy the ethos of what democracy is going to be about.
All right. Dr. Abati?
Okay, let me start with Côte d'Ivoire. Now, the inauguration of President Alassane Ouattara was yesterday, Monday, for the fourth term of 5 years. Now, Alassane Ouattara, two issues here that we should be concerned about. The first is Sithitism in Africa. Now you have in Paul Biya, a man who is 93, who was elected to die in office. You have in Equatorial Guinea, Teodoro Mbasungu Nguema, who also, is a very old man who has been ruling that country forever. The concern here is that in Côte d'Ivoire, we seem to have created another dictator who wants to remain in power forever. Now, President Alassane Ouattara was Minister of Finance. He became Prime Minister 1990 to 1993. He went on to be Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. He returned eventually, anyway, with involvement. He became President of Côte d'Ivoire in 2010. In a contest with Laurent Gbagbo, which led to conflict, led to violence. Over 3,000 people died. And since then, he has been in power. He won the election in 2010, 2015, 2020, and now in 2025. He is 83 years old. In 2016, he decided to remove constitutional limits after the fashion of Nguema Mbasungu in Equatorial Guinea and Paul Biya, just to sit tight. And after the example also of Paul Kagame in Rwanda. So this idea of people thinking that they sit tight, without them a country cannot move forward, is part of the affliction that we suffer in Africa. It was Louis XV, Louis II, who said, "Après moi, le déluge." But Madame Pompidou, his ally, turned around and said, "Après nous, le déluge." So you have these leaders from, the 17th century to date who think that without them, a country cannot survive. So this delusion of grandeur is what is playing out, in my view, in Côte d'Ivoire, as we have seen in Cameroon, as we have seen in Equatorial Guinea, and as we saw under the reign of Louis XV. Now, the second issue is about this whole concept of benevolent dictatorship. A man becomes president, leader of a country, and then even the international community continues to offer excuses when it is convenient, which harks back automatically to the hypocrisy of the international community. When the West talks about Paul Kagame, they say, "Oh, he has transformed Rwanda. He's a very benevolent dictator." Okay, where is that phrase about benevolent dictatorship in the literature about democracy? And they've started with Alassane Ouattara. They'll say, well, he managed after 2020 to stabilize the economy, economic growth consistently over a decade. And so, because of that, does he have the right to violate the constitutional order? This is one of the major issues that, analysts of African politics will have to deal with. Now at 83, he's going to be 88. When he gave his speech yesterday, after the swearing in at the presidential palace, he says now he's going to focus on generational transmission. What does he mean by that? that he's expecting that the younger generation will take over from him when he's already 88. And in Cameroon, when Paul Biya is already 100 years old. So this messianic pretensions, this messianic delusion poses as much threat to the democratic project in Africa as the kind of military interventions that we have witnessed in some of our countries. 11 African leaders showed up. Nigeria was represented by the Nigerian Vice President Kashim Shettima. And then now that he's there, he's talking about, economic prosperity, private sector partnership, and all of that. And yet this is the same man who became president on October 25, winning 89.77% of the votes, simply because he did not allow the major opposition figures. Laurent Gbagbo was outlawed, as it were. Thiam, formerly of Credit Suisse, was also accused of not abandoning his French nationality. Then he allowed Laurent Gbagbo's estranged wife and some other women to come and contest with him, 5 of them. Of course, the outcome was predictable. But I've defined what the concerns are. You talked about Riley Moore.
Riley Moore.
Who met with our national security advisor and had a lot of things to say. That, okay, we have discussed, the working group has started, which NSA Nigeria represents Nigeria on, and that the Nigerian government is taking steps to address the concerns. He's also right in that regard. He was also in Benue State, where he met with Catholic bishops and also met with the Tortiv and also met with the governor of the state. Even if those chieftains and the Catholic bishops refused to meet with him in government house, they insisted on meeting in the bishop's house. But it was good optics, And at the end of the day, he also congratulated the Tinubu administration for taking steps to address the concerns that have been outlined and for rescuing 100, of the abducted children in Niger State. He witnessed all of that, and he's been very active on social media. Now, he was one of those persons that the President of the United States asked to go and do investigation. I said yesterday that why is this fact-finding coming after the fact, a posteriori? But, I was told, America, we know what is happening anyway, it doesn't matter, and all of that. So you crucify a country, an administration, and then you come looking for the facts on the ground after the fact. But I think Congressman Moore will seem to have been impressed with his meeting with the National Security Advisor and what he observed while he was here. Just the same way that Boris Johnson came here to Owerri, Imo State, and was saying Nigeria is a very safe place. So, and that's why I condemn some of these parachute intellectuals, commentators, who comment on what they know next to nothing about. When you see it yourself, you can make your own assessment. In other words, America doesn't always know. America can always do with, additional intelligence. However, I put a clause here. Now, Congressman Moore may have been impressed by what he saw, by the meetings that he had with the Nigerian authorities. But the final decision, we must remind ourselves, rests with President Trump. President Trump, when he sends people to Qatar to attend meetings, or he sends Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, they are always very quick. Even Scott Bessent, they're always quick to say, the final decision rests with President Donald Trump. I now think that Nigeria should not just, on the basis of what Riley Moore has said, say, America already understands where we are coming from. There is something called lobbying. We should still get those lobbies in America, no matter the cost, to continue to pursue the Nigerian narrative. And we can see that, in terms of American diplomacy process, openness is very important. Nigerians should be open. The Nigerian officials should not tell lies. The easiest thing to do is to lie. But just put the cards on the table, and then there's nothing wrong with international cooperation. And what we have seen here, in my view, is a triumph of, if you like, of diplomacy. One more subject you mentioned, which
is it Benin Republic?
Benin Republic. Yeah, my main point, which I wrote about this morning, back page of this day, is that I was very shocked that President Talon did not even mention Nigeria. Not even a word of gratitude to say, oh, Nigeria supported us, thank you. All this talk about ECOWAS standby force and all that, all these countries that cannot deploy enough troops and that cannot pay their dues under ECOWAS protocols. When you talk about ECOWAS standby force, it is about Nigeria. It's usually a Nigerian force, whether it's in Sierra Leone or it's in Liberia. But I made a point yesterday that constitutionalism is important. The constitution of Nigeria is very clear. Even when the president of Nigeria deploys the military on limited combat duty under Section 5 sub 5, he is obliged within 7 days to go back to the National Assembly to say that, oh, you know, because of the emergency, and I said yesterday, he acted reasonably well, but he must still follow the law by going back to that National Assembly to seek ratification for that action. The whole idea of that section of the Constitution for the benefit of illiterates is that the president of Nigeria cannot interpret this, whatever section of the Constitution, as he wishes. It is to prevent dictatorship. It is to say that the armed forces of Nigeria belong to the people and there is a procedure. And the word in Section 5 sub 4 and in Section 5 sub 5 is shall. Shall in law, again for the benefit of the illiterate, is obligatory. And that was why I was saying yesterday that I expected that by yesterday the president will have just said, okay, we did this, you know, National Assembly just ratify. As we saw in 2021, when there was a situation in Niger, and the National Assembly said, no, we cannot deploy troops, ECOWAS standby force or not. So I expect the regularization within the province of the law quickly, no matter the emergency that may have motivated the president of Nigeria to act. It's even more urgent because I do not think that the situation in the Republic of Benin has already ended, just as it has not ended in Côte d'Ivoire. In Côte d'Ivoire, there's going to be legislative elections on December 27, and the opposition parties, particularly the party of Laurent Gbagbo, say that they are not going to be part of it. In the Republic of Benin, let nobody also assume that the situation is over. So the president needs to protect himself. And those, I don't even know the people who are advising him. We used to have a legal advisor in the villa. So please, can they do their job and just protect Nigeria and protect the president?
All right, let me start from here in Nigeria. The Niger children, I asked Charles Erika earlier on a very important question. And I say this because on one hand, we celebrate the fact that the children, at least part of the children, are back. It's important because at the end of the day, the most important thing is to have all 315 of them returned home. That's one of the things we'd say. If you ask a parent, if you ask people who are close to them, what they are not thinking about is not how they were rescued in the initial sense of it, is are their loved ones back, home and safe, and good to see them back. But even furthermore is the state in which they have returned. He also talked about the fact about the look in their eyes, what you can read about the state of their mental state, and you cannot be surprised about that when you have children who've been in captivity for the last 2 weeks. And so you can clothe them and give them fine, nice outfits to wear on the outside. But what is very important is the long-term effect and impact on these children who have been used as a political tool, as we're now as it's unfolding, or just an act of criminality. That's one. I highlight this point to say that we cannot afford as a nation to continue to just rescue or respond or react to kidnappings, but we owe a duty to our children and the future of this nation to prevent and protect them from these kinds of horrendous experiences, such as what these children have been through. Some of these young children children, and I'm putting a human face to this because a lot of things that we have talked about it in the academic sense of it, we've talked about it in the theoretical sense of it. Let us bring a human face to it and see if hopefully we can all then put our hands together to do right by our children in Nigeria. Now, it is important to note the fact that by prevention, ensuring that our schools are safer, ensuring that security is on ground to protect these people, we would not have to have a story whereby young children are used as collateral or bargaining tools with the government to be abducted in such a manner. It's a failure on our children. It's a failure on their parents who pay taxes. It's a failure in many instances. And we don't want to have another headline saying this. Now, the reason why there's a repeated call for the mode of operation in rescuing or the release of these children is that it gives us an idea of what could potentially happen again and again. Because if you don't arrest the people who are behind this, if you don't go after them decisively, then it means that it could occur again. It means that we will wait with bated breath which community would be affected again by the mayhem of these terrorists. I won't call them bandits because they are terrorists. Let us give them the name and nomenclature that they deserve. And so if we don't deal with these things, then we'll continue to see this happen. And then it goes back again to the security policy of this administration. Are we now returning to negotiating with bandits, paying of ransoms? Because irrespective of what aides say or government officials say, that what is clear and what we see is evidence on ground. And until it's proven to the contrary, unfortunately, Nigerians will continue to believe that there are people who are negotiating with terrorists at the expense of innocent Nigerians. And I think that is very sad. And so we will continue to push for this until we get an answer, because we cannot continue to mollycoddle terrorists and bandits in Nigeria. I think it's very important so that in the future we're not looking at how we are looking for how to rescue these children after they have been through this trauma that some of them might not survive or recover from for a lifetime. Going on to that, very quickly on the African scene, I'll bring all the stories together just to wrap up in a few seconds. And that is the fact that we've seen a spate of coups on the West African bloc region in recent times. And we keep condemning these coups or reacting to these coups. But until we deal with the fundamental or underlying issues of these coups, we will continue to see discontent amongst the people that would give an incentive or a rise to actions like coups in different parts of the land. And that's why we keep on questioning, what is ECOWAS' stance on sit-tight leadership? What is ECOWAS' stance on restoring the institutions and protecting democratic structures in their member nations? It's not enough to just put boots on the ground, but all the leaders, it's unfortunate that most of them already are sit-tight leaders, so it depends on who is going to be speaking. But at least in Nigeria, on the West African bloc, we have perhaps one of the strongest democracies. And so one of the things that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu ought to be doing, in addition to protecting through military force, is also ensuring that we're able to, so that we don't allow the West to come and make decisions on our behalf, ensure that we're able to uphold democratic structures in these countries. If we don't do that, we'll continue to have a reprieve for a season and then another coup announced in another West African country because of this lack of respect and honoring of institutions, whether at judicial level or across the way elections are run on the West African bloc. And unfortunately, it's symptomatic across the African continent. And so the conversation will continue to happen. And I'm glad that we have Professor Pat to tell me, come on this show in the next few minutes, in a short while, to discuss with us some of the issues around why democracy has not really worked on the African continent, amongst many other issues.